the dam that drowned a town. Sometimes history isn't erased by time. Sometimes it is buried, slowly, deliberately, beneath rising water. Long before the lake existed, before maps were redrawn and roads quietly disappeared, there was a town resting in a narrow valley. It was not famous. It did not appear in travel books or history lessons, but it was alive. It had a church whose bells marked the hours, a school where children traced their names on chalkboards, and streets that echoed with footsteps at dusk. People lived there for generations, believing the land beneath them would always remain solid. Then came the announcement. It arrived not with sirens or panic, but with paperwork, official letters, government seals, measured words that carried irreversible weight. A dam would be built upstream, the valley would become a reservoir, and the town, every home, every grave, every memory, would have to disappear beneath the water. They were given 24 hours. Some laughed at first, convinced it was a mistake. Others stood in silence, reading the notice again and again as if the words might rearrange themselves into mercy. But the decision had already been made far away, in offices that would never smell the damp wood of their homes or hear the evening bells one last time. The final day arrived under a gray, unmoving sky. Church doors were open not for prayer, but for farewell. Candles burned low as families stepped inside, touching the pews, the altar, the walls, as if memorizing them by hand. In the cemetery, shovels broke into the earth as graves were opened, the past carefully lifted from the soil so it would not be lost beneath the rising water. Children cried, confused by the urgency, clutching toys they would not remember owning years later. Adults worked in silence, their movements heavy, their eyes hollow. There was no anger left, only exhaustion and disbelief. By evening, the town stood nearly empty. Then the water came. It crept in at first, quiet and patient, swallowing the lower roads, licking at doorsteps, slipping through windows. Roofs became islands, steeples became markers, and finally, even they vanished, one by one, beneath a widening, unbroken surface. By morning, the town was gone. Today, the lake looks peaceful, still, beautiful even. Tourists stand at its edge, unaware of what lies below. But on calm days, when the water is perfectly clear and the light strikes at just the right angle, something appears beneath the surface. The faint outline of streets, the shadow of rooftops. A town waiting, unchanged, unforgiven, and never truly gone. The announcement. The notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, folded neatly and slipped beneath every door in town. No sirens announced it. No official vehicles rolled through the streets. No voices raised alarms. Just paper. Most people discovered it the same way, by accident. A hand reaching for a coat, a foot brushing against something on the floor, a glance downward that turned ordinary routine into something permanently altered. The envelope was thin, government issued, stamped with an emblem few recognized, but everyone instinctively feared. Inside, the message was brief, clinical, almost polite. Due to the construction of a new hydroelectric dam upstream, the valley in which your town resides will be flooded. All residents are required to vacate the area within 24 hours. Compensation details will follow. Cooperation is appreciated. That was all. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement that an entire world was about to disappear. In the bakery on Main Street, the bell above the door chimed as usual. Flowers still hung in the air from the morning's first batch. Mrs. Calder stood behind the counter reading the letter for the third time, her fingers dusted white, her lips silently moving over the words as if repetition might change them. She looked up at the clock on the wall, 8:14 a.m., then back at the letter again as though time itself had betrayed her. Across town, the school bell rang for first period. Children filed into classrooms unaware that their desks, their drawings taped to the walls, and the playground outside would soon exist only in memory. One boy, barely 7, handed the letter to his teacher with a confused frown. "My mom said I should give you this," he said. The teacher read it once, then again. Her hand trembled, but her voice did not. She folded the paper, placed it carefully on her desk, and began the lesson as planned. Fractions, multiplication, normal things, things that still made sense. By mid-morning, the news had spread fully, settling over the town like a heavy fog. Doors opened and closed. People gathered in small clusters on sidewalks, holding identical envelopes, speaking in hushed, uncertain tones. Some argued, some laughed nervously, insisting it had to be a mistake. Others simply stared at the distant hills where the dam would rise, as if trying to imagine water where land had always been. At the town hall, the mayor stood before a small crowd, his face pale and drawn. He had known the announcement was coming. He had known for weeks, perhaps months. But knowing and accepting were very different things. "The decision is final," he said, his voice echoing in the wooden chamber. "The project has already begun upstream. We've been assured there will be assistance with relocation." "Where?" someone shouted. "When?" asked another. "What about our dead?" a woman cried from the back of the room. The mayor opened his mouth, then closed it again. There were no good answers left. Outside, church bells began to ring, not for a service, but because no one had thought to stop them. The sound drifted through the streets, slow and heavy, as if mourning something not yet lost. At the edge of town, old Mr. Harlan sat on his porch, the letter unopened in his lap. He didn't need to read it. He had lived there longer than anyone, long enough to remember when the first road was paved, when electricity arrived, when the river flooded and receded. He looked toward the water now, calm and glinting beneath the sun, and shook his head. "They think they can move a town like furniture," he muttered. Inside the church, Father Keller unlocked the doors and stood alone beneath the stained glass windows. Light poured through the colored panes, painting the floor in fractured blues and reds. He imagined the water rising to that very spot, swallowing the altar, the pews, the names etched into memorial plaques along the walls. He knelt anyway. At noon, the official vehicles arrived. Not many, just enough to make the decision real. Men in pressed uniforms stepped out, carrying clipboards and measured expressions. They spoke calmly, efficiently, answering questions with rehearsed phrases. They marked buildings with chalk. They took photographs. They avoided eye contact. One of them knocked on the door of a small house at the edge of town, where a woman stood holding a baby on her hip. He explained the situation as gently as he could. She listened, nodded, and closed the door without a word. Inside, she sank to the floor and pressed the child to her chest, whispering apologies he would never understand. By late afternoon, the town felt hollowed out. Cars were loaded hastily. Possessions were sorted into what could be carried and what would be left behind forever. Some people packed furiously, as if speed might outrun fate. Others moved slowly, deliberately touching walls, door frames, windows, committing them to memory. A group gathered at the cemetery just before sunset. Shovels struck earth with dull, rhythmic thuds. Coffins were lifted with care, placed into waiting trucks. Names were spoken aloud, as if to promise the dead they would not be abandoned. The air smelled of soil and sorrow. As evening fell, the sky turned the color of rusted copper. Lights flickered on throughout the town, one by one, as if in quiet defiance. Families sat together in their homes, surrounded by packed boxes, listening to the hum of electricity and the ticking of clocks, the familiar sounds that would soon be swallowed by silence. No sirens ever came. No countdown was announced. Only the steady, unstoppable approach of water. And as night settled in, the town held its breath, unaware that by the next sunset, it would exist only in memory, and beneath a lake that would one day look peaceful enough to hide everything it had taken. The last day. Dawn arrived without ceremony. No bells rang to greet it. No birds sang from the rooftops. The light crept over the valley in a dull, colorless way, as if even the sun understood that this was not a morning meant for beginnings. It was the last day the town would ever see. The air felt heavier than usual, thick with damp cold rising from the river. Mist clung low to the ground, drifting between houses and wrapping itself around fences, trees, and empty streets. The town looked half dreaming, suspended between what it had been and what it was about to lose. Inside the homes, people were already awake. Some had not slept at all. Suitcases lay open on beds and floors, stuffed unevenly with clothes, photographs, and objects chosen in haste. Things deemed important enough to carry, and others left behind without ceremony. The distinction felt cruel and arbitrary. How could anyone decide what parts of a life deserved to survive? In one house, A man stood in his kitchen staring at a coffee mug he had used every morning for 20 years. The coffee inside had gone cold. He did not remember pouring it. Slowly, he placed the mug back in the cupboard, shut the door, and walked away as if afraid that if he lingered too long, he might never leave. Down the street, a young mother knelt beside her daughter, tying her shoes with trembling fingers. "Where are we going?" the girl asked. "Somewhere safe," the mother replied, though the word safe felt thin in her mouth. She brushed the child's hair back, hiding her own fear behind a forced smile. Outside, a truck idled, its engine coughing impatiently. As the sun rose higher, the town began to move. Doors opened, cars were loaded, furniture was dragged out and left on sidewalks for no one in particular. There was no order to it, only urgency. Some families left early, unable to bear another minute among the familiar walls. Others lingered, walking through each room one last time, touching door frames, tracing cracks in the plaster, whispering goodbyes to houses that had known their laughter, their arguments, their secrets. At the center of town, the church door stood wide open. Inside, candles burned along the aisles, their small flames trembling in the cool air. People entered quietly, heads bowed, some clutching folded papers, others empty-handed. No service had been planned, yet the pews filled anyway. The organ remained silent. There were no hymns, just the low murmur of prayers spoken in different voices, overlapping and blending into something wordless. The priest stood near the altar, not in ceremonial robes, but in a simple coat. He said nothing. There were no words large enough to contain what was happening. Instead, he moved among the people, placing a hand on a shoulder, offering a nod, a look of understanding. For many, this would be the last time they stepped inside the church where they had been baptized, married, and mourned their dead. Outside, the sound of shovels striking earth echoed from the cemetery. Graves were being opened, not for burial, but for retrieval. Wooden caskets were lifted carefully from the ground, dirt clinging to their sides. Names carved in stone were read aloud, each one acknowledged, as if the living were apologizing for disturbing the rest of the dead. Some wept openly. Others worked in silence, their faces set and pale. The wind carried the smell of soil and damp wood through the air, a scent that would forever be tied to this day. At the edge of town, a group of children sat on the curb, legs dangling, watching the adults rush past. Their world was unraveling, but they did not fully understand how or why. To them, it felt like an evacuation before a storm, temporary, confusing, unreal. "Will we come back?" one asked. No one answered. By midday, the sun stood high and merciless. The town looked exposed, stripped of its secrets. Doors stood open, curtains fluttered, drawers gaped like open mouths. The silence between sounds grew heavy, pressing down on everything. Government workers moved through the streets, checking lists, marking buildings, urging people to hurry. Their voices were calm, practiced. This was not their home. This was a task. One man refused to leave. He sat on the steps of his house, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the horizon. His wife had left earlier, unable to watch what was coming. Neighbors tried to reason with him. Officials tried to persuade him. Finally, someone placed a hand on his shoulder and told him the water would be here by nightfall. He did not move. Only when the first trickle appeared at the far end of the road, a thin, glinting line creeping across the asphalt, did he stand. He looked once more at the house behind him, then turned away without a word. By late afternoon, the town was almost empty. Cars lined the road out of the valley, packed tightly, engines idling. People stood beside them, staring back at the place that had shaped their lives. Some took photographs. Others could not bear to look. The water advanced slowly but relentlessly. It pooled in low places, filled ditches, crept into basements. It reflected the sky in broken pieces, turning streets into mirrors. A bell rang once, then again, before falling silent forever. As the sun began to sink, the first houses surrendered. Water lapped at their porches, climbed their steps, pressed against their doors. Windows darkened as the lower floors disappeared. The town seemed to exhale, as if finally giving in. On a hill overlooking everything, a small group remained, watching in silence. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. By the time darkness fell, the valley was unrecognizable. Only rooftops and treetops remained above the water, scattered like islands in a black, glassy sea. The lights had gone out. The roads were gone. The town's shape existed only in memory. Somewhere beneath the surface, houses stood intact, rooms arranged as they had been that morning, tables set, beds made, toys left behind. And as night settled over the water, the last sound of the town faded, a soft creak, a distant splash, the quiet surrender of a place that had lived, loved, and been erased. The last day was over. The town was gone. The flood. The water arrived without anger. There was no roar, no violent surge, no wall of destruction crashing down upon the valley. It came instead with a terrible patience, moving inch by inch as if the land itself had invited it in. By the time dawn broke on the second day, the town no longer belonged to the living. Mist hovered low above the surface, blurring the line between sky and water. From a distance, the valley looked peaceful, almost beautiful. The kind of calm that might fool a stranger into thinking nothing had ever existed there at all. But beneath the surface, the town was still there. The first structures to disappear were the lowest ones: sheds, fences, garden walls. Their shapes softened as the water climbed, edges dissolving until they vanished completely. The roads followed soon after, their familiar cracks and faded markings swallowed without resistance. What had once guided people home now guided nothing at all. A single street lamp still stood near the old crossroads, its glass dome half submerged. At dawn, it flickered once, weakly, then went dark forever. The reflection of its dying light rippled across the water like a final breath. Farther in, rooftops emerged like dark islands. Shingles glistened beneath the thin layer of water that lapped against them. Chimneys rose like broken fingers, pointing toward a sky that no longer recognized them. Somewhere beneath those roofs were kitchens where meals had been shared, bedrooms where secrets were whispered, and hallways that still remembered footsteps. The water pressed forward with quiet determination. Inside the submerged homes, furniture shifted slowly, buoyed by currents that moved with ghostly intention. Chairs tipped over, picture frames floated free of walls. Curtains swayed gently in the dark, as if stirred by an unseen hand. Time seemed to stretch and distort, turning minutes into something endless. In the church at the center of town, the water reached the doors by mid-morning. It seeped inside, spreading across the stone floor in thin, silver veins. The pews absorbed it first, darkening as the wood drank deeply. The altar remained dry for a while, elevated just enough to resist. Sunlight filtered through stained glass, casting fractured colors onto the rising surface, reds and blues trembling together, dissolving as the water climbed. Eventually, the water reached the altar steps. It paused there, as if hesitating, then continued without mercy. The bell tower stood above it all, stubborn and proud. From a distance, it looked untouched, a lone sentinel rising from a growing sea. But inside, the bell's rope floated freely, untethered, brushing against the walls in slow, mournful arcs. No one would ever ring it again. By midday, the town was unrecognizable. Only fragments remained visible: the peak of a roof, the top of a street sign, the highest branches of trees that once shaded sidewalks. Everything else lay hidden beneath a smooth, reflective surface that gave no hint of what it concealed. Silence settled heavily over the valley. There were no voices now, no engines, no footsteps. Only the occasional ripple as something shifted below, surrendering fully to the water's weight. Birds circled overhead, confused, calling into an emptiness that did not answer. From the surrounding hills, former residents watched. They stood in small clusters, wrapped in coats, their faces pale and hollow. Some held binoculars, searching for familiar landmarks, anything to prove that what they had lost was still there. Others stared without blinking, afraid that if they looked away, the last traces of their lives would vanish entirely. A woman pressed her hand to her mouth when the steeple finally slipped beneath the surface. A man turned away, unable to watch any longer. A child asked where their house had gone. No one answered. As afternoon faded, the water stilled. Wind softened. The surface became a mirror, reflecting the sky so perfectly that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. The town was gone, but the lake looked eternal, untouched, serene. By evening, only the highest hilltops remained above water, like islands in a vast, artificial sea. The valley had been erased, replaced by a quiet expanse that gave no hint of what lay beneath. Yet beneath the stillness, the town remained. Houses stood intact in the dark, Rooms waited in silence. A clock on a wall marked the moment time had stopped. Streets stretched on beneath the water, leading nowhere, holding everything that had once been. Night fell gently. The moon rose. Its reflection shimmered across the lake, hiding the truth beneath a veil of silver light. And somewhere below, preserved in shadow, the town waited, unchanging, unbreathing, but not forgotten. The water had taken it, but it had not erased it. The silence beneath the water. Long after the floodwaters settled, long after the maps were redrawn and the signs replaced, the lake became something ordinary. People came for weekends, for fishing, for quiet afternoons under the sun. Children learned to swim where streets once crossed. Boats drifted lazily above rooftops no one could see. To most, it was just another reservoir, calm, blue, unremarkable. But the water never forgot what it covered. Beneath the surface, time did not move the way it did above. Down there, nothing aged. The town remained suspended in its final moment, preserved in darkness and pressure. Chairs still faced tables. Doors still waited to be opened. Footprints still marked the last paths taken before the water arrived. It was not decay that claimed the town. It was preservation. Sometimes, when the lake level dropped during long dry seasons, fragments emerged. A fence post, a section of road, the tip of a church steeple breaking the surface like a bone through skin. Locals would gather along the shore, drawn by curiosity or something harder to name. They spoke quietly, as if afraid to wake what slept below. Old residents returned on those days. They came not to see what remained, but to feel what had been taken. They walked the shoreline, tracing invisible streets with their eyes. Here had been the school. There, the bakery. Over there, the house where someone was born, or married, or buried long before the flood came. Some swore they could hear things when the wind died down. A door closing, footsteps on stone, the faint echo of a bell, ringing where no bell remained. Most dismissed it as imagination, grief's echo clinging stubbornly to memory. But others knew better. They felt it in their bones, in the way the air grew heavy at sunset, in the strange stillness that settled over the lake when night fell. The town had not vanished. It had simply gone quiet. Years passed. New generations grew up unaware that beneath their boats and fishing lines lay a buried world. The story became a footnote, a local legend told to children who listened wide-eyed and skeptical. Yet every so often, something would happen. A diver would descend too far and return shaken, refusing to speak of what they had seen. A fisherman would swear his line snagged on something solid that pulled back. A drone would lose signal flying over the deepest part of the lake, its footage ending in static and shadow. Authorities offered explanations. Currents, equipment failure, imagination. But the lake remained. On certain nights when the moon hung low and the water lay perfectly still, the surface would begin to mirror something that did not belong to the sky. Shapes would appear, lines too straight, shadows too deliberate. For a moment, it was possible to see the town as it once was, preserved beneath the water like a memory refusing to fade. Those who witnessed it never spoke loudly about it afterward. They didn't need to, because some truths do not demand belief. They simply exist, waiting. The town was not angry. It did not seek revenge or recognition. It did not rise from the depths or call out for justice. It simply endured, holding its breath beneath the lake, carrying the weight of every life that had passed through it. In that silence, there was a lesson. Progress moves forward, always. Roads are built, dams are raised, maps are redrawn, but nothing is ever truly erased. Every place leaves an imprint. Every life leaves a mark. And sometimes when the water is still and the world grows quiet, those marks rise just close enough to be felt. The lake looks peaceful now. Children laugh on its shores. Sunlight dances across its surface. Boats cut gentle lines through water that once flowed through streets and doorways. But beneath it all, the town remains, waiting, remembering, unforgotten. And perhaps in the deepest hours of night, when the world above is asleep and the water lies perfectly still, the town remembers us too, the ones who built it, the ones who left it, and the ones who will never know it was there at all.
Shadows